Are you ready to embark on a transformative journey of rebuilding your life? Look no further than the Rebuild podcast. Join us as we dive deep into conversations that nurture personal and spiritual growth. Through the wisdom of the Word of God and practical applications, we'll guide you towards becoming the best version of yourself. On this podcast, we will delve into a variety of topics and insights, ranging from mental and emotional well-being to personal development and spiritual growth. Together, we'll explore the paths to healing, resilience, and the restoration of inner peace. Subscribe now and let's rebuild our lives together, one uplifting conversation at a time.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Rebuild Podcast. I am your host, Sean Romy, and today I want to talk about a topic that I'm pretty sure a lot of people are aware of. This is one that you learn at some point, maybe in children's church. This is something that we've seen a lot of in movies. Something that we can call one of the bases for how we carry ourselves. This is the 10 commandments. These 10 guidelines, these 10 instructions, these 10 commands, these 10 laws, if you will, that God gives us on how to carry ourselves, how to deal with each other as individuals, and how to serve our Creator, our Heavenly Father. And I think that this is a very beautiful topic. I think this is one that we can definitely get in depth on. We can expound upon a little bit. I think it's time for us to really look at, on a larger scale, what's being said in these 10 commandments. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into this. So first and foremost, before we get to the 10 commandments, let's understand what the 10 commandments were about. So first things first, when it comes to these 10 laws, these 10 commands that God gives us, the root, if you will, of where these come from, we could say that they stem from the people of Egypt when they were doing what they were doing. We could say that. We could say it's a culmination of what happened between the people leaving Egypt and what happened with Adam and Eve. We can say that these 10 commandments started with Adam and Eve, even though the law didn't exist in that time. We can consider the law being cultivated or maybe processed or thought about during the time of Noah, when everything was in a hard reset. There are multiple different angles we can consider with regard to these 10 commands. But nonetheless, these 10 commands, we can honestly say, stem from what we've seen prior to God allowing the men and women of Israel to enter into the promised land. Another thing that we have to consider when it comes to these 10 commandments, these 10 laws, these 10 guides, if you will, goes back to the way that He aligned for us to be when He actually created us. See, when He created us to be self-governing. Everything that He intended was for the individual to be able to take care of self. No one was supposed to be over or under another. We were all supposed to be equal. And at some point we were starting to get to a place where we were really becoming more and more like the people that we were living with, or we find ourselves surrounded by. So to keep a guideline, here are these 10 laws, these 10 references, if you will, to keep us in alignment, in balance, if you will, so we don't get too high on ourselves, or we don't feel too down about ourselves because we're not in certain places. One very obvious misconception with regard to the 10 Commandments is we take the 10 Commandments quite literal. And the downside to that, and we'll get into it when we actually break down these commands, is when we take them literal, we open the door to missing a lot more of the meaning behind how these things play out in everything. In fact, the very nature of the 10 Commandments themselves, which leads into another challenge or misconception, is that each of the commands are isolated. They are their own. They can stand alone, or they do stand alone, which on one hand they do. But the way that God operates, the way that God creates, the way that God purposes for things to happen, and it's stated that, once you break one, you've broken them all. And when we get further into expounding on these, you'll understand why they're intertwined. Even though they could be standalone, they're really not alone. They are really intertwined with each other. These guidelines that God gives us are just as much a reflection of how God created everything. We can see a natural representation, and we can see a spiritual representation. We can see a position that stands for the spirit. We can see a position that stands for the natural or the physical. The same thing for the meaning behind a lot of these commands, right? Again, what we may read or take at face value when we're reading them is acceptable, but there's deeper context to what we're reading. Now, when it comes to the importance of these commands, we have to consider that if we are really following these commands, then the quality of our life will be that much better, because we're more aware of everything, how one decision really affects multiple aspects of life. We often talk about the ripple effect. We often talk about, how we can take a drop of water, drop it into a lake or a pond or a body of water that's pretty still, and we can see the waves expanding out. And we call that the ripple effect. And how that one drop of water creates this motion that spreads to an exponentially greater impact than what that moment actually was. And when we think like that, that opens us up to really being more cautious, not fearful, but cautious of what we say, what we do, how we think, how we respond to different stigma, how we address things, how we react to things. And we really try to stay focused on being purposeful, vice just being or existing or doing or being idle or going 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. When we follow these commands don't just have spiritual benefits to them. I know for a lot of us, we think, well, if we're following the 10 Commandments, then we're basically a shoo-in to get into heaven, right? Because that's the supposed end goal that we're all looking for. And no, there's more benefit to this model, if you will. By following these commands physically, you're talking about living a more quality and a more balanced life. Again, you're more cautious of the decisions that you make. We're not gonna irrationally go out and do things. We're not going to be hasty about making certain decisions. I'm not gonna just go out there and just make an emotional decision because this sounds good in the moment. I'm not gonna respond to something that's been given to me in kind. If you speak bad upon me, I'm not going to reciprocate that by speaking bad upon you. If you take the low road, I don't have to take the low road. Emotionally speaking, if we follow these commands, we're going to be more well-rounded as well. A lot of things won't have the effects that maybe they once did. Again, we'll learn how to respond, vice react. Not everything needs to be addressed. Not everything needs to be spoken upon. You can allow for certain elements to become their own form of entertainment. I know for a lot of people, as a great example, the Cat Williams situation. Everybody probably watched some of the highlights, or maybe watched the Club Shay Shay interview as a whole, and you could tell a lot of people were really into what he was saying and how he was saying it. And of course, most people were expecting a lot of claims, denials, rebuttals, some type of get back, because how could you say whatever it is that you say? Some did, some didn't. Some did things their own unique way. Some went directly at, the particular subjects that they might have been involved in, clearing the air, whatever the case may be. In that same vein, you could find a person or two who maybe didn't say a word. And, in accordance with mainstream culture, we assume that because nothing was said, that means that whatever was spoken out was exactly what it was. And I'm not saying that Cat Williams is lying or anything of the sort. I don't want any smoke in that regard. But if what's being said doesn't necessarily affect you, because you know where you stand and you know who you are and you know what you were doing and you know why you were doing what you were doing, you don't need to respond to it. You don't need to give into the unwarranted peer pressure, because you know where you stand. And that's a beautiful thing when you consider taking into account being one with yourself. When we consider how following these commands really opens up a very balanced and focused lifestyle, it also opens us up to really good discernment. And again, everything doesn't necessarily have to warrant a response. That's a beautiful thing, again. When we consider how these guidelines, how these examples, how these statements, how these laws, how these commands are given, there's purpose behind them. And it dictates, it showcases just how to allow God's purpose, God's will, God's element to flow freely. And any of these breakages can cause hindrance, a blockade, a stoppage. And I know I harped on that a lot in the last episode where we talk about love. And it's the same in regard to every other element and characteristic of God and how He made creation. Everything about what He does is free flowing. And if we want to be in alignment with that and allow ourselves to flow freely in this realm, then we want to ensure that we're not doing anything that can cause roadblocks. And again, His standard is really high. And the reason His standard is high is our own doing. We're in a unique place of wanting to have our way and follow His way at the same time. And it's kind of hard to do. I know for many of us, we think, the things that we desire, the things that we want, they're what's best for us because we know what we want. And ironically enough, He who created us knows far greater what's better for us than what we do. And sometimes, and we might have experienced this in one form or another, we might find that the very thing that we've been pushing and pressing and asking for is nothing like what we asked for or what we wanted or what we even need for that matter. Interesting. But let's go ahead and start talking about these commands. So again, we are aware of what we're doing and how we're supposed to do these things. The first command, and if you want to go and find the 10 commandments, you would go into Exodus chapter 20, and I believe it's verses 3 through 17, and you will be able to find the 10 commandments. And the first command, and we're often aware of this one, is you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, for a lot of us, that seems very self-explanatory. You should put, we shouldn't worship anything other than God. Now, while this statement is as simple as it is, it really does have a lot of depth to it. Again, God is a very free-flowing God. Everything that he does in his process, in his way, in his time. And we have to ensure that we are in alignment with what he's asking for, what he's requiring. Now, when we find ourselves outside of this place, when we find ourselves doing our own thing, whatever that may be, no matter how big or how small, that thing has now become the blockade. That thing has become more important than the flow. Ironically enough, a great example of this comes from the carrier of the Ten Commandments in Moses. When you consider his disposition with the children of Israel, who constantly gripe and complain and moan and groan because of the punishment that they have to endure for not being in alignment with God's will, God's still telling Moses to follow his command and doing what it is that he says to do. And he was supposed to, at one point, tap the rock one time. And this was symbology. This was supposed to be representative for those that would be looking into the New Testament about how Jesus was supposed to come and be the representation of the living water coming out of the rock, also being labeled as the rock. And Moses, and out of anger, did his own thing in that one small detail, hitting the rock more than once. Put him in a disposition where his anger, his frustration, his disappointment, his rage, his own feelings mattered more than God. That in turn made his entire disposition more important. Therefore, it was a God. Now, when we look at it like that, again, a small decision having a ripple effect. Now, of course, God being God, God already knew how to fix this problem, which he took care of. But it was the fact that here was a man who did everything that he was told, and he saw the remnant, and he had the glory, and he was in the great place and everything else, but that one decision. Now just imagine if God really stuck to a certain gun and allowed for Moses not to be considered one of the leading men in the movement of God. Like, he really decided to punish him and send him to a fiery grave for that one decision. Now that really opens us up to realizing and understanding that a small decision can knock us out of alignment, creating for ourselves a God that is far more important, even if it's just a moment thing, because of the ripple effect that it has. Go back to the situation with Adam and Eve. Eve ate the fruit after having a lifetime thought in a split second. That's typically what happens when we make the decisions that we make. It may be in a moment, but when we're thinking about it, a lot is processing in that split second. And in this split second, she's imagining herself on the same level as her creator. Imagine that. And the buildup of being able to be on this level, the excitement that's coming with this. Now it's formulating in her mind, and now she's looking out into the natural world, and she sees the fruit and recognizes that the fruit don't look any different from any other tree that's in the garden. Sure, you know what? Let me take it. It'd be nice to be able to discern like God discerns, and it'd be nice to be able to create like he creates, and it'd be nice to be able to do all of these things and be at this level, not realizing she already had it because she was made in the image and likeness of her creator. And when she ate the fruit and she gave to Adam and he ate the fruit, the disconnect that happened, that one small decision led to another small decision that became a really big decision, or a really big after effect, excuse me. The ripple effect behind that still goes on in today's day and age. From eating a piece of fruit, one piece of fruit, and see all of the chaos that ensues. You take a look at Abraham and Sarah when they were going into the place where God wanted them to go, and being told about the promise that they were going to have, and having been in a place of, impatience, making the decision that they made, Sarah making the decision that she was going to allow Abraham to lay with Hagar so that they could conceive, so that prophecy could be fulfilled. And the irony behind that is the same person that egged on that decision or decided that it was a good idea to do is now resentful behind the result, because you realize that she was out of alignment. But that same ripple effect plays out in today's day and age. For those of you that may not know or may not have followed, or maybe don't study in terms of well-rounded history, and again, no disrespect in that regard, but Ishmael and his bloodline become known as the nations that become Islam. So now you see the dynamic of the Islamic fight and the Judeo-Christian fight, and you see where that goes. And this battle that we have that's been going on like a gang war. And we've been fighting it for so long that we don't realize, or we don't recognize where it starts. And in fact, most of the time when we have people that talk about this dynamic, they refer to everything was good, or everybody agrees on certain points until we get to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Hagar, and Sarah. And that's when everything goes haywire, and that lets you know that's a ripple effect that is taking place, and it still affects us to this day. One decision, and whatever happens in that moment is going to have a lasting effect. This is why we have to be very cautious of what we're doing, because in that moment, that thing becomes our God, and that may get passed on to future generations, and they may not be aware. So now you're blindly passing on this same issue and problem. And we wonder why we struggle in a lot of cases, in a lot of areas, the way that we do. So it's not just having another God from the standpoint of, well, I'll take this phone and I'll worship this phone. It can be as simple as that, but it's the magnitude behind it, because anything that we're doing, and I know a lot of us, when we say that, we try to make it to where we're supposed to focus our entire energy on prayer and reading and praise, and that's all you're supposed to do, which is a great tool, but it's put in the wrong perspective or context, if you will. Yes, we should pray and we should praise and we should read, but let's not get wrapped up in the idea that we have to do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. One, that's not what God intended. If he intended for that, he would have just left us in the heavens, and we could be doing that with the angels. And two, if he really wanted us to do that, there would be no need for this physical realm. We do have to ensure that whatever it is we're doing is in alignment with God's will and purpose, though. But let's not be so pretentious behind the spirituality that we become too deep for our own good. Because there are other requirements that we are to give. And how can we give those if we're being in this posture, a facade, if you will, at that? Because even when we beat ourselves up, it sounds more religious than it does genuine. The next command states that you should not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. Or in the King James Version, thou shalt not make unto thee a graven image. That means that we shouldn't use anything that becomes an idol. This also includes the things of God. And I know people will probably ask, what does that mean, or how does that look? I'll give you a great example. Many of us, especially in popular culture, we utilize prayer, we utilize scriptures, we utilize praying hands, we utilize the crucifix, we utilize the head of Jesus, we utilize the cross, we utilize the fish, and many other images to represent that we are about the Christian life. And we want people to know that we're about the Christian life. However, many of the things that we're using to showcase and symbolize that we're about that life are just material things. What God wants us to utilize to represent us following him and being about what he wants is our living. So what if I put a cross on my arm, or I have a chain with a crucifix on it, and letting people know that, I believe in God and I'm all about that life? And again, we all fall victim to this in some capacity. If we really were about that life, we wouldn't need some type of symbolism or symbology to showcase that we're about that life. It would showcase in the way that we live. So I wouldn't have to go out and buy nice $30,000, $40,000 necklace, or I wouldn't have to go and put a tattoo on my arm, or I wouldn't tattoo a bunch of scriptures on myself. And then I'm not saying that doing that is an idol or idolatry, but again, if our heart matter in this regard is more so about trying to showcase or show and prove that we're about that life, then the people who will react to it, that'll be enough for you to feel as if you're about that life. In other words, in Matthew 6, in the very beginning of Matthew 6, before we get into the element of prayer, and even after we get it into the element of prayer, when he starts talking about fasting and these things, he lets it be known that if we're doing the things that we're doing for other people, then the reactions that we get from the people will be our benefit. That'll be the highest of the high that we'll get in that regard. And the funny thing about doing that is even as we're doing that, it only builds us up, and we get in our own way and we want more. So we're going to do it more and more to get what we want, which is that natural satisfaction. The only downside to it is you'll never get enough of it. But anything that we put in place of God, as in the first commandment, becomes the idol. It becomes that graven image. And so we have to be careful with regard to how we carry ourselves, where our hearts are, what our heart's intents are. We have to also be very well informed about the things of God and how to carry that out. In other words, when it comes to this element, because just like the first command, we should ensure that we're aware and knowledgeable about the spirit realm just as much as we are about the natural realm that we're living in. Because while we might be stepping into a place and operating in a place that we believe that we're comfortable with, if we're going deeper than we are capable of being able to operate at, we're going to find ourselves drowning. Quite similar to being out in the water. If you know you can't swim, you don't want to go in water that has undertones or strong currents, maybe a steep drop off. You don't, because if you find yourself getting sucked in, it's going to be difficult, almost impossible for you yourself to get out of it. And you're going to put someone else in danger to try to save you. This is what that command is referring to, as well as the first one, as well as number 3 and number 4, which all refer to the God aspect or the spirit aspect, if you will. This next command, command number 3, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. For the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Or, as we find in the King James Version, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And to utilize, misuse, or vain, they both have the same relative meaning. Abuse, rendering the name of God or the name of Jesus as useless. Well, how would you do that? Well, blaspheming is one good way of doing that. A lot of us think of, certain words, certain swear words or curse words, and that's a great start as well. Denouncing God is another way of using and utilizing his name in vain. Denying his existence. Now think about where that goes. And think about the efforts that we see a lot of men and women of the past and even in today's day and age go to try to remove God from everything. And you think about what happens as a result of that. Rendering his name useless and saying that it's not worthwhile and saying that it has no power, it has no weight. It's just a word. He's not real. Doubting him or denying him. Taking matters into our own hands is another way of putting misuse to the name of the Lord. So imagine praying to God for a certain intervention. God, I'm praying for more peace in my life. Or God, I'm praying for you to provide me a way out of XYZ situation. And in the process of God working this thing out and testing your faith, you feel as if he's not moving fast enough. Go back to the story of Sarah and Abraham. You take matters into your own hands. And now as you take matters into your own hands, you're basically saying to God, nah, you can't, you're not moving fast enough for me. And you think about how large and how expansive that is when you consider that now. That's a lot of ground that we're covering in just that. And it's not just the name of the Lord that we're talking about in this regard. It's his power, it's his works, it's his word. That's why we have to be careful about how we present the word, how we share the word, how we live the word. Because even in the way that we live, especially if we're choosing to be about this life, if the way that we are living is out of alignment, we're also rendering his name useless. It's pretty powerful when you consider that. It makes you look at how you carry yourself, what you do and how you do it. Really gets you into self-assessment mode. I don't want to be in the wrong place. I don't want to be in the wrong mindset. I don't want to deny or denounce or renounce or belittle my Creator. Command number 4 tells us to remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. Now, further along in Exodus, it says, 6 days we'll work and labor, but on the 7th day, or the Sabbath, it's the Sabbath, and we shouldn't do any work. Nobody, not us, not our family, not our cattle, not our slaves, no one. This is a day to rest. This is a day to reverence. This is a day for praise and worship, if you will. This is a time for us to really recover because we're putting in a lot of work. And you take the time to consider the benefit of being able to rest, and what it does, even from the standpoint of the physical nature. You know, if we rest, we can recover from a long week. We're more likely to come back to work with a clearer mind, a clearer conscience. Maybe we can take a step back and see maybe where we may have made a mistake. Maybe we see where we may have pushed too hard, or maybe we forgot to carry the one in that equation, or whatever the case may be. But allowing ourselves the time to rest and relax and to give reverence. And again, it's not just a spiritual blessing that comes with this, but it's also a physical one too. Anyone that has ever been in a situation or in a position where they've been overworked, where they work 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, 45, 100 straight days. No matter how many hours you're working, if you're constantly going, you start to break down. Your body doesn't know how to process what's going on. And the pain behind that it can be unbearable. I know in today's day and age, we push so much about grinding and getting it in and working hard, and you got to do what you got to do. And, you know, we put all of these guides out there and these guidelines and telling people that, you know, you can't afford to sleep because success it's a hard working process, and it is, but not so much so to the point that you sacrifice your own well-being for it. And again, allowing for another element of this to showcase what it is. If we're pressing, if we're praying, if we're worshiping, if we're toiling and we're stretching ourselves thin, this is a time to listen. This is a time to be still. This is a time to be quiet and allowing the process of God to be what it is. Let him intervene. Think of it like sowing a seed. When you plant a seed, you don't go out there and forcibly allow this seed to become the plant that you're looking for. You do your part. You put it in the ground. You ensure that it's in fertile ground, and you ensure that it has all of the nutrients that are there. You might have to water it every once in a while, maybe, you know, a little bit of work here and there, but for the most part, you're allowing the process to be what it is. And when the time comes for that seed to become the plant that it is destined to be, it will do so. You're not out there forcibly making that happen. You're allowing the process to be what it is. That's the same thing with remembering the Sabbath day and keeping it holy. That's allowing us from a big picture perspective to take some time away and to rest and to recover and allow the work that we've put in to manifest itself. Not to become overworked and overstressed, because then at that point, we could find ourselves liable to make some terrible decisions. And let's put this even into a bigger perspective, because God is God, and we know that. And we know that God doesn't have to take time off. But even after he created everything in creation, he took a day. He rested. So if he took the time to do that and to show us the importance of being able to do that and making sure that we do that, it should be known that there's more to it than what we're giving it. And we shouldn't neglect this. Which is perfect, because it leads right into command number 5. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. I love this command because there's so many layers to this. Just like the other ones, but the layers in this particular command go so deep. I still find a lot to be said in regard to this. Now, from the surface level, yes, you want to listen and obey your mother and your father. Now, it does say that you can live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. And here's one of the elements to this. To honor is to show respect. Yes, I think we can all agree to that. Now, this gives two parts in this context. It gives two parts. To give honor means you have to be deserving of it. So if I'm the mother and the father, I have to ensure that everything that I am giving my child for them to honor and respect me, I am also leading by example with regard to that. And the benefit of being able to do that opens the door for the child to not have to suffer the same wrath, the same punishment, the same stumbling blocks, running into the same walls that the mother and father did. Hence, you spend more time reaping the benefits of living a life accordingly than having to walk through the desert in circles for 40 years. Proverbially speaking, that is. Now, for a lot of parents, and I've heard this a lot even during my days as a child, a lot of us use this in the context of getting our children to do what we want them to do. But again, if I'm not walking in the alignment of the very thing that I'm teaching, it is going to be difficult for that child to listen to what I have to say. Now, I know there's another element, and I believe that's Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 9, that actually talks about this, where those that are in charge, to listen to those that are in charge, again, children, obey your parents, among other people who are in subjective positions. But that last part in that passage lets it be known that those that are in charge, that are responsible for those that are under them, they better be on their P's and Q's, because they'll be held liable. And again, you think about honoring your father and mother so that you may live long in this land. That means I have to be, again, in that place. It's not just do what I say because I say do it. No, I have to be living by that same example. And if I can't live by the example I'm trying to teach, it's going to be difficult for that person to follow, because I myself am not the example by word. I am also the example in action. Kind of ties into all of the other commands we've just read. If I make this about you doing what I say because I'm the one in charge, it's more about me than it is being free-flowing and allowing the lessons to manifest themselves. And now I'm hindering you from growing, because it's about me, not about you becoming who you need to become. Another way to look at this, and this is one that I find very, very appealing, if you will. To honor your father and your mother. When you break down the word father and you break down the word mother, the representation is a source and the earth. Honor the source and the earth, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Now that can actually take a little context. That's resource management 101. Take care of the gift that has been given to you. Think about what was created in Genesis chapter 1. That's a pretty big deal if you really sit down and think about it. God created everything and he wants us to take care of it. That would also mean that we would have to be very knowledgeable about the resources that are here, the land that is here, our brothers and sisters that are here, the other animals, the other creatures that are here, the water, the air quality, all of that stuff. We have to be mindful of it. And we have to ensure that we are also taking care of ourselves, because we are just as much a part of this element of creation as the creation itself. Now, I told you this is a very deep and it's a very juicy, if you will, command. This is also representative of self-care. Think of, again, father and mother, the source and the earth. This is representative of the spiritual and the natural. We are created in the spiritual and the natural. And as long as we can honor and respect the two elements, then we're able to find ourselves in a harmonious balance. We can find ourselves operating in our full potential. The Word of God tells us that our bodies are temples, so we should take care of them. The physical body is a temple. So I know for a lot of us, when we talk about denying the flesh and rejecting the flesh and putting the flesh in subjection and all of these things regarding the flesh and talking about how bad it is and just denying it and all out trying to make it as if it is the worst thing ever created, we have to go back and consider what God said in the very beginning. God saw that everything that he created was good. The representation of good is good, pleasurable, and agreeable. So if God finds that everything agrees, if everything is connected, then there shouldn't be anything bad about our physical being. What makes that bad element bad, if you will, is our own doing. That's why he won't connect to nature or the man, if you will, the way that we think that his purpose would allow him to. He could, but why would he do so? We corrupted ourselves. He didn't corrupt us. We did it to ourselves. But that doesn't mean that the physical being is bad. And we have to learn how to subject our minds and our hearts to be in alignment, going back to all of the other commands. So we should stop telling ourselves from a one-dimensional perspective that the flesh is bad. It's not that the flesh is bad. It is the mindset and the heart that we have allowed ourselves to taint what God created. And now we've misunderstood the purpose behind the physical being that we are living in. Once we get that on track and back in alignment, everything else takes care of itself. Command number 6, you shall not commit adultery. This is another one of my favorites because of the depth that it is. Now, when we consider adultery, a lot of us are aware of adultery as being fornication, right? Most of us consider that to be that. Whether it's cheating, whether it's premarital sex, whether it is, that whole ordeal. That is what we think of. And yes, at face value, this is true. We should not do that. It is wrong. It is not a good thing. And there are a lot of consequences to that we have to be cognizant of. The dangers behind all of this. Soul ties and diseases, among other things, and so on and so forth. Yes, this is true. But adultery is also breaking commitments. Adultery is also breaking vows. Not holding up to our end of the bargain, our end of the deal. Now, what does that mean? Consider this. If we make a promise unto our God that we're going to do something, maybe we make a vow, maybe we make a promise that we're going to follow in God's footsteps, and we step away, we walk away, we quote backslide, if you will. That's adultery. We didn't uphold our commitment. We broke it. We decided to do our own thing. And it doesn't even have to be a spiritual one at that. Think of the way that we carry ourselves in the natural realm, right? We're at the place where we're in the early part of the year. Most people come up with resolutions, things that we're going to do, and maybe we do it for a week or two, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and then we kind of fall back into the usual routine of things until the next year. Not holding ourselves to the standard or the commitment that we made, treating it as if it means nothing, or because we're putting other things in place of the thing that we're committing ourselves to. It really goes a lot further when you think about it that way. And now we would have to be more cautious and more careful about the vows that we make, the promises that we make, the commitments that we make. Because sometimes just the mere fact of taking on a certain commitment and not being able to uphold it, especially without cause, really can do some damage. You think about how many people are affected by that. It gets really, really deep when we consider adultery is way more than just sexual immorality. So when we consider making those promises, we best be as transparent as possible. Because heaven forbid, we commit ourselves to something and we can't honor it, or we don't honor it. And that's not to say that things don't happen. We can't, we can't plan for everything. But when you have the capability of being able to go and do something and you choose not to do it, even though you committed to doing it, that's when you find that it's a terrible thing. That's the adultery part. Thou shalt not steal. Many of us think this is very self-explanatory as well. Just don't take what's not yours. But to steal, as well as murder, and I will actually put the two of these together because they are, in essence, one and the same. When you steal, you're being deceptive. You're taking by ill means. It's not just taking a piece of property. You could be taking something spiritually. You could be hindering something spiritually. Again, God is free flowing. So if I'm hindering that, if I'm making it more difficult for this thing to happen, it causes problems. If I'm deceptive in the things that I do, I have an ulterior motive. I have a hidden agenda. This is also stealing. In fact, the same elements that we can find in that regard with regard to stealing, right? Again, stopping the flow also ties into killing or murder. See, most of us think that murder is just taking another person's life. And it's more than that. In the same regard, it's like stealing. You're taking what's not yours. You're stopping flow. You're hindering something, and it doesn't have to be a physical thing. I don't have to actually harm you physically in order for it to be considered murder. I can do more damage with my words. I can attack your spiritual being. I can attack your character. And if I can get you to fall or to falter or to stop, if I can get you to lose yourself, whether it does end up becoming a physical thing or a spiritual thing or a mental thing, I've committed murder. I've stolen from you. I've taken from you. Again, considering something as simple as, what do you want to be when you grow up? And someone says something that you might not agree with. And so you say to that person, find something more realistic. You might have a great intention on wanting that person to find something that's more in line with what you believe. But to say it in that regard, you don't know what that person's path might have been. And now if you kill that dream, you've killed that person on the inside. I've witnessed this many a time in my childhood. I've also had my own experiences with this. Let me be clear with this. While we do have a responsibility to ensure that our youth and those that are under us are following guidelines, we should not hinder their flow. They may go down a path, and in that journey, along that path, they may find another path that leads them into purpose. I will be honest with you, when I was in junior high school, I was majorly focused on becoming a professional athlete. I grew to be 6'5", so, I kind of really wanted that thing really bad. But along that journey, I found a lot of opportunities to operate more so in what my natural giftings were: counseling, mentorship, teaching. I found a passion for learning, but not conventional style learning. I've found a love for music. And all of that came as a result of chasing the one dream that I had. Finding downtime, I was able to put some things together, or I was able to find myself operating in this new place. But without going down that path, I don't find this other stuff. So we have to be careful what we're saying when we're telling our more inexperienced people, whether they're in the ministry or they're in school or they're our children. We have to be careful what we say to them and what we tell them what they can and cannot do, because that is murder. That is also stealing, because we're taking away an opportunity for growth, purpose, and development. It's very powerful when you think about it. We shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. Or in the King James Version, bear false witness. Witness is testimony. It's the same thing. This one is also seemingly pretty self-explanatory. I shouldn't lie on my brothers and sisters. But there's more to it than that. You tie in stealing, you tie in adultery, you tie in murder. And if you have any type of deception, any type of deceptive motive, you have any type of corrupted thought process behind what you're saying or what you're doing to bring a bad witness against another person, you're in a bad place. Now, considering how we're all God's children, and considering how we're all in our own places and our own journeys, and we have our own struggles and we have our own things that we have to process through on a daily basis, consider that what we may see on the surface might just be a little bit more than what we understand. I might see a guy that might be in a position that he's homeless, but I shouldn't judge him and think that he's a lazy bum because he's homeless. Could have been a bad decision. He might have found himself in hard times. He might be far more educated than I am. Maybe he didn't have a certain discipline. We'll never know. But we can't pass judgment on the guy or speak ill against the guy just because we see what we see. Just as much as it says in the word that we shouldn't want what another person has because we don't know what they did to get there, it's the same thing on the other side. Just because we see a person in whatever position or whatever condition they're in, we don't know what happened and why they're there. Think about all of the men and women who were talking to Job as a great example. Here's a man who had everything and lost it all. It wasn't his doing that he lost it all. He was being tested. The enemy was trying to get God to see that if Job lost everything, that he would curse his creator. And he's repenting, and he's finding himself trying to be in alignment. His wife, his friends, and all these different people are speaking bad about this creator. Why don't you just curse him and get it over with? Just let it be and just die. It's not worth being in this place. Essentially also passing judgment on him too. Like, bro, you had it all and you have no explanation for this. Like, what did you do? Like, you must have did something. And you think about putting yourself in that position, and we've all been in a position like that at some point or another. What was it like? Did you find out people were speaking bad on you or talking down on you? Maybe were passing judgment against you? Did it hurt certain relationships? Probably did. Bearing false witness. Speaking on things that we aren't aware of. Speaking ill will. Maybe lying on an individual. Oh, he's in that bad place because he was this, or he did this, or she said that, or she was doing this. We don't know. Even if we're trying to find a way to create or manipulate our own story so that people can have sympathy for us, if we have to lie or hide certain things to make ourselves look a certain way, that's also bearing false witness. And it never bodes well. The truth will always reveal itself. And last but not least, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. And there's more to that particular thing. All of the possessions, their wives, their spouses, and everything else. And again, we think this is pretty self-explanatory, right? Don't trip off the grass being greener on the other side. But it's more than just that. I could find myself desiring and wanting something just simply off the strength that someone else has it. I could find myself compromising, and I will do anything I can to attain or obtain this thing that I'm desiring. When you consider that, you go back and look at the story of Adam and Eve, and you consider what Eve was thinking in that moment. First sign of coveting, if you will, because she wanted what she thought she didn't have. And she was willing to break God's law to get the thing that she so desired because she wanted it. Not realizing she was being deceived the entire time. Being grateful for what we have. There are plenty of verses in the Bible that talk about that. And again, we talked about it with regard to the last command. If I see someone else that has something, I shouldn't desire it or want it because I don't know what they did to get it. Many of us, and this ties into many of the other commands as well. You talk about a great example when we talk about signs and wonders and miracles. A lot of us push and desire and want to see signs and wonders and miracles. And when we see a sign or a wonder or a miracle happen, the first thing we want to do is, I want to do that. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to do that until we check the heart matter. Why do I want to do it? Do I want to do it because I want to be on the stage in the front line, being able to do that thing so everybody can see the power of God in me? Do I want to do this because I want that person that I'm performing this miracle or this sign or this wonder for to be able to see the power of God in me? Is it about me or is it about God? And if it's about me, it loses its luster. And it kind of makes everything that I'm doing in that place, being in alignment and doing all the great things, it makes it more so difficult to find that alignment because I'm in the wrong mindset. I'm more focused on the sign and the wonder and the miracle than I am about God's movement. And I'll remain stuck because that blockage is until I can realize that I'm in the wrong place, I'm going to do that. That same mentality now puts that thing, that sign, that wonder, that miracle as an idol. Because I want that. I want to be able to do that. There you go. You go back to that heart matter. Check the mind, the mindset. These are very, very powerful commands. And when we really take the time to look at what's being said, when we really break down what's being asked of us, what's being required of us, how to operate in the spirit realm, how to operate in the natural realm with our brothers and sisters, what different aspects mean, and how minute in terms of the details we really have to go to really follow these things. You understand why the standard is as high as it is. But when we live that life, when we're really living that life and being about that life, we can find ourselves really finding a sense of balance. We can find ourselves in a place of being able to say, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And not pushing and not fighting with trying to be anything other than in the alignment and the free-flowing process of God's will and purpose. Father, I thank you for this time that you've given us to speak on your word, talking about the 10 commandments and how in depth each command is and how they're all intertwined with each other and how we should be mindful of how to carry ourselves and not be hasty or not be emotional or not be irrational in the decisions we make, the things that we say, the things that we do. God, continue to allow us to operate in a free-flowing flow, if you will, so that we can be who you've called us to be. We thank you, Father, for everything, for all that you are. We pray your will be done. All these things we ask in your holy name. Amen. I thank you guys again for taking the time to come with us and talk about the 10 Commandments. I pray that this finds you all well, and I hope that you find your success and your purpose. And until next time, this is the Rebuild Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Romy. I love you all. Peace.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. Tune in weekly as we dive into topics such as finding your calling, overcoming obstacles, building resilience, and strengthening your relationship with God. If you're ready to embark on a transformative journey of faith and personal growth, then join us on the Rebuild podcast. Together, let's build a solid foundation that aligns with God's will and leads us to a life of purpose and fulfillment.